how and when did you decide to become a writer?
How and when? I don't know if I ever decided it. I feel like it just kind of occurred to me as something that I was good at doing and something that I really enjoyed doing, and so I just kept doing it. And I just kept sort of stumbling upon these writer roles, I guess, first as a creative writing student and later on as a teacher, and then, getting the fellowship. I'm not sure that I, still can even be defined as a writer. I mean, I do write,
yeah.
But, so it's just one of those things, I just love to do it. There's nothing else that I really want to do. And so that's how it kind of came to me, I guess.
So, Balli, you spent your schooling days in different places, in Singapore, and I read on the web that in Japan, Russia, Philippines. So what did you gather from all these places? What kind of influences, what kind of experiences?
I think I gathered a sense of, gathered a realization that communication is very different for me, I think, than it is for other people who've lived in one place. I think communication for anyone in Singapore is very different because you're living in this very multicultural place. And so the words that you choose become important. The language, do you want to check that? Okay. The language that you use becomes important. Your choice of words becomes important. You tend to deliberate on the choice of the words that you use and the emphasis of the words that you use. And you tend to listen to dialogue differently. And I would say that I think played some part in it. On a more practical aspect, I guess I went to international schools, which did cater for creative writing and thinking outside the box, and you can be a writer if you want, if that's your passion and that's what you can do. Schooling in Singapore as well, I think I mentioned this before, writing compositions, things like that, really honed that discipline,
yes.
I think, and that drive to have an end result of something. So I would say I had a good mix. I was very fortunate in that sense.
And you just mentioned you went to the same university which Kiran Desai attended, and you did a undergraduate and postgraduate MFA, creative writing course. So how do you think it helped you in shaping your writing and your skills as a writer?
I think more than anything it gave me confidence. It gave me some affirmation that what I was writing was important and that people wanted to read it. I don't think a professor can stand up at a podium and sort of lecture you on how to write, and that's not how workshops are usually conducted. It's, you're sitting around and you're reading each other's work and you're criticizing more than you're writing, in fact. I mean, you do a lot more criticism than writing, and you tend to learn from what other people are doing right and wrong. So that sort of training in that was really important. It set sort of a foundation for me to become a writer, and then also just, having that validation as well. I studied creative writing, therefore when I leave university I need to continue what I study. I wanted to put what I studied to good use. So I guess in that respect as well there was some of that, but I think for the most part the community as well, the sense of community, the sense that writing wasn't this little thing you did on the side, suddenly became something that it was my purpose every day, to get up to write. And so I still kind of keep that with me, the fact that I have a background. It's really important for me. That said, I don't think you need any of that. I think as long as you instill that discipline for yourself and have a community that you can turn to and have a sense of confidence in your writing, you can do it. People were writing far before there were bachelor's programs or MFAs or any of those things. But for me, it did sort of push me in that direction. So I'm very grateful for that as well.
But let's say for somebody who doesn't come from English literature or creative writing background, somebody who has done physics or chemistry or something like that, and he wants to become a writer, do you think that if he goes to a creative writing course like this, like the one you attended, would help him?
I think it would, yeah. It would definitely. It really is what you take out of the experience as well. If you go into it with an open mind, I think you can really, you can do a lot. But you also need to have a sense of what you want your writing to be, what you want to do with your writing.
Yeah.
Because if you walk in and just let everyone in a workshop mold you and shape you, I mean, you'll just be out of sorts when you walk out. And I think anyone from any background can benefit from a writing program. They don't need it. If you want to write, you will write, and you can write. But it can't hurt you, in other words, to be in a creative writing program.
Yeah.
It can never hurt
Definitely,
you.
yeah.
If anything, you just, even out of your assignments, you get a volume of work, at the end of it. Even if it's crap that you never want to look at again, you still have been forced to write something, so you still get a volume of work out of it. So.
Then maybe you were the youngest person to get this David Wong Fellowship at the University of East Anglia. How did you feel when you got it?
I was in complete shock, and I was just elated. I mean, it was exactly what I wanted and needed. I couldn't have asked for anything better. I mean, it was really I think the highlight of my life. I think reading that acceptance letter.
I'm sure there will be more highlights.
I hope so.
This was probably just the beginning.
This was a huge deal. This is I mean, I found out I got shortlisted, and I thought, okay, I've made it that far. I've been shortlisted. I never expected that I would make that final cut. That was really beyond my expectations.
I think this is great. Tell us about your experience at UAE. You spent 1 year there. Sorry. East Anglia. Yeah.
It was an interesting experience. It was. I had just a vast amount of time all of a sudden, and before that I had been teaching in Singapore, so I was very, very busy all the time and didn't have much time to write, as anyone with a full-time job would. And suddenly I just had the entire day, all day, to sit and write, and I knew that I was prone to freezing up and being like, oh my god, I have so much time, what do I do now? And so I tried to work myself out of that a lot. I mean, I took it one day at a time, which I realized was a really good step to take, because when I met the other fellows at the reunion in June, they all told me that they sort of arrived at UEA, and all of them had different stories about sort of, freezing up and thinking, what do I do now? I have, so almost too much time on my hands, and so I tried to take it sort of one day at a time. It was a very isolating experience in a lot of ways. That's just the nature of, that kind of position, I guess.
But was there some kind of interaction with the faculty or other students there?
I met other students. I got to meet some MA students, and they were really nice, really, really friendly, very welcoming. We did get to meet with some faculty sometimes. I had a mentor who was supposed to guide me through the process, but it was very much. It was hands off in a lot of ways, because I sort of wanted it that way until I had things worked out. I didn't want anyone sort of reading my work and looking over my shoulder when I knew it wasn't as good as it could be. So I ended up not sort of using the faculty mentorship so much, and she was quite happy to sort of be hands off as well. So it was flexible in that sense. We did have a dinner in January. I guess I started the fellowship in October. In January there was a dinner where I got to read an excerpt from my work, and that was very affirming, because everyone really enjoyed it, and everyone felt that it was good, and I was like, thank goodness, because I've just been writing. I had no way to gauge. I mean, I thought it was okay, but to hear that from them really did sort of fuel me for the next couple of months. And I think you need that. I think you need, even if you're in a very isolating position like that, you need some sort of affirmation. You need to give a reading. You need to do something like that to be like, look, world, here's what I'm doing.
Yes, of course,
here I am.
As a writer, you put words to the paper in complete loneliness, and then you read it out before people and get information. That's great.
So you need that.
For the benefit of those who are listening to this conversation, can you describe in brief what was your routine like, average day?
Sure. What I did was, I usually woke up, had my breakfast and all of that, and then between sort of breakfast and lunch, I cook all of my own meals, so I take a very long time with all my food and everything. But between breakfast and lunch was just sort of reading through what I'd written the day before and setting up what I would write. I tend to sort of write, sort of almost sketch out what I'm going to write for the day, so that I know when to start and I know where to stop as well. I know that like at the end of this day, if I have reached this point in the chapter, if I've reached the point where he walks out of the room or she throws a bottle at him or something, then I've done my work. And so I kind of set out my daily work in that way. Sometimes not that formally, sometimes just by reading or just thinking about it or reading a book even or something, just get myself. Then after lunch around from like 12 till 5 I think was the sitting there and pounding out the words, although it wasn't continuous. It was like write 2 paragraphs, walk around the apartment, write another 3 paragraphs, go outside. So I did that. I tried to churn out something every day, even when I didn't feel like writing. I felt it was important to look back at the end of the day and say, okay, I've done something today. I've done my day's work, basically.
Was there any moment or any day or any time when you felt sort of stalled, challenged?
Oh, definitely. There was one particular part in the novel that really had me stalled. On the other side of that, I guess, there was one part of the novel that I almost felt I was too excited to write. There was a particular character that I really felt for, and all of his sections in the novel were really, really fun to write. But then there was another character who I wanted him to be in the novel, but I didn't know how, in what capacity. I didn't know what he was doing there. And so I remember there was a time, I think it was, the worst thing about that was I had already written him through the entire novel, and only at the very end did I realize nothing worked. Nothing that he did worked. He was completely useless to me. But I still wanted him there, and so I really, really struggled with that. And yeah, it really did disturb me, because again, I'm isolated from the rest of the world. I'm on my own all day. So when I don't like a character, it's like he's in the room with me and he's making fun of me and taunting me, and I have to kind of push him out of the room. And so I kind of took a break from the novel altogether for about a week. I couldn't go on until I fixed this. And so I did. I remember I went to Cambridge for a day. I went to London for another day. I went out a lot. I did everything to get away from it. And when I came back, I thought I had an idea. I didn't until 6 months later, until like last week. I realized what I needed to do with this character. But I just kind of needed to jog my mind a little bit.
You realized what you want to do. So I remember that being very frustrating. I remember being on the phone with my mom and telling her I just don't know what to do, and I couldn't explain it either, and it was very frustrating. And she was, to her it was crazy talk. I was like this imaginary man in my novel. So good. Now let's move on from the fellowship experience. Wanted to ask you, you have Indian roots, for your parents. So, and on the other side, you haven't been to India at all, and you have this like. No, I'm not blaming you or anything. It just happened, and then you grew up in different Asian countries, so you have this Pan-Asian experience. So, how do you see yourself? Do you see as part of the Indian writers group, or do you see as part of the Singapore and Asian writers group, or do you don't group yourself anywhere?
Yeah, not sure yet. I guess where I can sort of group myself. I would say the novel or the writing that I do is definitely I can't just call it Indian writing because it's not based in India, but my characters are mostly Indian. And my character, I think my characters
diasporic
completely.
Indians,
Sorry?
Indians would claim as a diasporic Indians.
Yeah, exactly. And they're Singaporean Indians. So if there is such a specific niche, I think I fit into that. I think the immigrant experience. I would say if on a specific level, I would say I'm a Singaporean Indian writer who wrote the only Singaporean Indian book, so far. Hopefully there'll be more, so I'll be in company of others who've done the same thing. But if not, I think I would like to be classified as an immigrant writer, because at the end of the day, like, I'm very interested in the background of immigration and how it's represented in literature, and the sort of how multiculturalism shapes that landscape. And so I think for me, I think an immigrant writer would be suitable. I've moved around so much as well. I've been an immigrant in so many different contexts. I've moved, so
anyway, we live in a hyphenated world, so
exactly. So I like to don't mind being a hyphenated person. Singapore immigrant Indian girl writer.
Okay, now that you've mentioned your novel, my next question is about your novel. So you're working on a novel on Indian immigrant family in Singapore. Tell us something about it.
Okay, it takes place between the late 60s and the early 90s, and it centers on the lives of a Punjabi family in Singapore whose lives start to unravel when their youngest daughter changes. Their youngest daughter goes missing. I mean, that's the first part of the book deals with her disappearance. She comes back, physically she comes back, but mentally she's not all there. And it turns out, from any reader's point of view, I think it's quite clear that she has a mental illness. But of course, the family kind of stumbles and doesn't really recognize it as such because they're still rooted in traditions. And so it's about how Singapore changes across this vast landscape from the 1970s to the late 60s to the 90s. It goes from third world to first very, very rapidly. But the people just don't really catch up with that mentality, and so their mindsets stay in the past and stay rooted in those superstitions and traditions. And so they think, she's misbehaving, or she wasn't properly raised, or she's possessed. I mean, they come up with all kinds of justifications for what she does, and they don't, even when it occurs to them that she has a mental illness, they don't want to deal with it because of all the taboos surrounding it. But then there's a twist at the end. I think I mentioned this.
That's really interesting.
So I'm quite excited about this twist. But
it's quite a marketing hook as well.
Twist. And also, it's called When Amrit Returns, because her first disappearance is a physical one, and throughout the novel she does leave and come back, and she's kind of in and out of their lives. She does disappear, she does sort of run off, and they hear about things that she's done and they don't want to deal with it. But also it's about how mentally she disappears, and their whole lives, everything, their relationships, their every decision that they make is actually based on wondering when she'll return to them, physically and mentally. And wondering how.
I think you described it as an immigrant's novel, but I find it a little different in the sense that if you see most immigrant writers, say for example the Indian writers who write on the experience of the Indian diaspora, in their writings when they're describing about their characters, there is primarily a longing for the life that they have lost in India, whereas this immigrant family that you're dealing with already settled in Singapore, and they're dealing with the changes that they're seeing in Singapore.
That's a good point.
Which is affecting their life.
I
mean, this is an interesting difference.
Well, I feel like, I guess in a lot of ways, I think Singaporeans have kind of migrated. I mean, not only did they come...
I think it was time somebody wrote this experience,
Well,
because everybody writes on the India that they've lost, the imaginary homeland.
Well, I also think that in a lot of ways Singaporeans have lost their homeland. I mean, in this case...
You said this is a temporary...
Exactly. Singapore is very temporary. It's constantly
temporal
changing.
Spaces,
I was just in the U.S., a month ago, and I was so shocked to go back to Washington, D.C., and my Metro pass from 3 years ago still worked on the trains.
Wow.
And then I left Singapore for England for 9 months, and I came back here and there were new buildings, that I didn't even realize, were being built. I mean, we are just so obsessed with progress and change, and I think that I know my grandparents' generation, they talk about leaving behind India. They do talk about, that homeland that they've lost and the traditions that they lost, some of the traditions that they had to leave behind. But when I hear my parents were born here in Singapore, and when I hear them talk about the past, it is like a homeland that they've lost, because Singapore was, they lived in, this very, very different circumstances from what they live in now, just vastly, just so different. And it really is like they migrated, even though they only lived up the street from where I live now. It really is like they migrated from a different homeland. So.
Yeah, this is another interesting point. You're in the same country, but you still feel you're an immigrant.
It keeps changing.
You've lost your past.
And there is a character in the novel who has to deal with, all the characters deal with that sort of experience in different ways. There's a character who has to deal with some prejudice when he realizes that his superiors at work would prefer, they promote a British man over him, and he feels very cheated because he feels that he's done more work than the British man, but with the colonialist history and everything like that, they still sort of prefer this, and he feels like, is this my homeland? This is supposed to be my homeland, yet somebody who's a complete foreigner comes in and takes the position that I want. And there's another character who leaves for America and has to come back because of the situation at home. While he's in Singapore, for the remainder of his life, he keeps trying to recreate the person he was in America, because he was so free there compared to the rules that he had to live under in his father's house. And there's a character who has to deal with his kids growing up in a more modern Singapore, his 3 daughters, and he fears that they'll become like their aunt. And so he has to watch them all the time, and he realizes that there's something in them that he just can't really change. There's a change that's happening in them already that he can't really stop. So there's all of that.
Interesting.
Trying to put all of that in a book.
So good. In a way, your book is, though I haven't seen a draft, by the conversation that we have made so far, it seems that this is a book about loss. And which is also the main theme of immigration, losing something. As a writer, Balli, what kind of themes do you like to tackle? As in this novel, you're tackling about loss and immigration, not immigration per se, but changes in society and culture. What are the other themes that interest you, or you would have to explore them?
Things that I like to explore. I think that sense of cultural isolation is really interesting. The fact that you can be in one culture and be a part of a culture but still feel very outside it. And also language I find really interesting. I just find the usage of language, the different ways that language is used, in just different relationships and contexts. I find that really interesting. I've written, the short stories that I have written are kind of loosely sort of themed by that concept. I'm still trying to develop that idea of how language really affects the lives, people's lives, their communication with each other, their relationships, and how people perceive language as well. I find that really interesting.
Okay, good. Now we are reaching about the end of this interview, so to speak, and I'll end it with a cliched question, which is very suitable for the readership that we have, writersconnect.org.
How much money do you think you'll make from your book?
No, not that. Who are the writers that you admire?
Okay. I think I mentioned Rohinton Mistry. I really enjoy him. Because I like the way he portrays a place with just so much authenticity.
Yes.
I also like, who did I mention before?
You mentioned a book about this UK guy who writes about his family.
Satnam Sanghera. That's his. That's the best biography I've ever read. Sorry, best biography I've ever read. It deals with similar themes to what I was dealing with in fiction. But it's the first biography I've ever read that's just it's hilarious and
even though it deals
deeply
with
upsetting.
very
It's
upsetting
both at the same time. There were there's a scene in that book, and if you read it, you'll get to it and you know exactly what it is. Where I actually had to put the book down because it was so upsetting. But then just 10 minutes before that, as I was reading it, I couldn't stop laughing at something that he'd written. And it was embarrassing. I was sitting on a bus and I couldn't stop. I had to cover my face. So I really admired that he really, took that and he did what he did with it. I thought that was really impressive. I like Margaret Atwood as well.
Yes.
I like women's fiction, so I do like Margaret Atwood. My favorite book by her is Cat's Eye.
Cat's Eye.
I really like Cat's Eye. Who else? I tend to like, again, immigrant writers, not necessarily Indian immigrant writers, but immigrant writers. And a lot of times, I guess, I don't know if this is unusual, but I tend to sort of focus on the books, not so much the writers. I guess because one book is by this writer doesn't mean I mean, Rohinton Mystery is really an exception. I'll read anything. I'll read, if he wrote the phone book, I would read it. I mean, he's just so good. But most other books, I mean, I'm very, very, very selective about the book itself, and not so much, just because this writer wrote it, then all of it must be good. So I think that's about. Yi Yun Lee, I mentioned 1,000 Years of Good Prayers.
Whose book is now being made into a film as well.
Yeah, it's quite impressive. I've been reading a lot of. I just read a story by her in the New Yorker, actually.
Yes.
So good. It was called something Emerald Girl. Something. It's in the New Yorker.
It's in the New Yorker website, so people can go there and find the story.
Oh, it's so beautiful. It's just so beautiful, and it deals with loneliness, which I found really interesting.
And since you just mentioned, are you looking to a huge advance? It has become the norm. I don't know.
I wouldn't refuse it.
Okay.
I wouldn't turn down a huge advance, but to be perfectly honest, the writing is just writing something good and looking at it at the end of the day or at the end of the process, or being affirmed by the recognition of a fellowship, or yes, the fellowship did include money, but
that itself is an honor.
Yeah, but when I first found out that I got the fellowship, I was like, £25,000, the numerical figure didn't even. It was, I got the fellowship.
Yes.
So just being recognized by people who are writers themselves and who are critics of writing, that is very humbling, and that just makes me feel like I am doing something worthwhile with what I love to do, which is just the best feeling. That is just such a huge reward. Like I said, though, I wouldn't refuse a huge advance.
Balli Jaswal, you're on the way to become more and more famous. All the best to you.
Thank you. I hope that's true.